everyone. Good morning to you. You're watching and listening to Breakfast with Stephen and Ellie. Good to have you with us.
Yeah, let's take a look at today's front pages for you now. And the Times focuses on the Partygate probe, saying Boris Johnson, that's new, saying Boris Johnson could be suspended from the Commons for more than a month.
That's what's in mind. The Guardian leads with what it describes as new evidence that Mr Johnson misled MPs over Partygate.
The Daily Mail leads with Boris Johnson's denials that he misled MPs over Partygate.
Express looks at Sue Gray, that report. There's the Express. The Sue Gray report, Boris Johnson describing the investigation as a cynical stitch-up. Not what Charlie Rowley was telling us before.
The Telegraph has the latest from Matt Hancock's leaked WhatsApp messages revealing Mr Hancock's battle with the PM over COVID rules.
Partygate rule-breaking would have been obvious to Boris Johnson, according to a report in the Daily Mirror.
And the Star, Boris Johnson may have misled Parliament 4 times concerning gatherings at number 10, they say.
Do we care now? Isn't it all done and dusted?
Well, the papers clearly do, don't they?
The papers care. Whipping it all up again, I just don't know. Let's see what the political editor of HuffPost UK, Kevin Schofield, and the commentator Candice Holdsworth make of it all. Good to see you this morning.
Good morning.
Kevin, let's start with the Times, should we? Looking at all of this, I have to say, this to me sounds very Westminster bubble now.
Yeah, I can absolutely understand where you're coming from. Partygate, we thought, had been kind of done and dusted. Boris Johnson is yesterday's man. He's no longer Prime Minister. But, you know, we had the Sue Gray stuff a couple of days ago, so that brought Partygate as an issue back into the Westminster firmament. And now, as bizarre timing, the Privileges Committee, which is investigating whether Boris Johnson misled Parliament over Partygate, has published an interim report, which, yeah, it does make pretty grim reading for Boris Johnson, and I don't think it is overstating it to say that he's fighting for his political career. I mean, unlike previous Prime Ministers, Boris Johnson, I think, has made no secret of the fact he would like his job back, preferably before the next general election. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And this is undoubtedly a potential roadblock to that. You know, if you read the report, now they've yet to take evidence from him, which will be box office in a couple of weeks' time. That'll be public, that'll be on TV, so that'll be worth watching, I would suggest. But if you read the report now, they're pretty clear that they believe he repeatedly misled Parliament. And the killer line as well is that they think it should have been obvious to him that these parties were going on and they were breaking the rules, and then he was then going into Parliament and saying all the rules have been followed. So they are clearly very sceptical about his version of events. Now, he's come out very pugnaciously after it, saying, I'm not sure how he can say this, but the report vindicates him, which, if you read it, I don't think it does, and is obviously going to fight his corner very hard. So, as I say, when he comes to give evidence, that's going to be properly worth watching.
Candice?
Yes, I mean, I agree with everything Kevin said, and I find it interesting as well that he's sort of batting it back to Sue Gray, trying to question her credibility. He's really going to use this. This is a bit of a political gift to him. That was she politically motivated at the time that she wrote her report, even though many people have said, actually, the report was pretty fair, pretty even-handed, although I suppose I could say some questions do need to be asked. I mean, she may have a conflict of interest, but I don't know if it goes as far as Boris Johnson is trying to emphasise.
No, I mean, interesting that, Charlie Rowley, you see him outside, who, worked with Michael Gove, so he toes the party line, if you like, but he worked with Sue Gray. He's cannot question her integrity as a civil servant.
No,
and that's important, actually, from someone who's worked with her.
Yeah, I think as someone who's worked in civil service for as long as she has and had such a successful career, you don't get to the level that she has got and worked for successive Prime Ministers and Secretaries of State if there's a suspicion that you're in any way biased towards one side or the other. You are a career civil servant. Now, obviously, that's all been thrown up in the air by a decision to take the job with Labour, but I think you're right. I think what Charlie said was pretty significant as a Conservative party official, that he never saw any evidence that she was anything other than completely impartial.
Yeah.
And it is worth remembering that she was hand-picked, wasn't she? I mean, Nadine Dorries at the time was saying she was the best, really impartial.
Jacob Rees-Mogg said she was independent, and actually Boris Johnson, when a report came out, said that he'd been cleared by it, so no one even suggested that, and he did survive Partygate. It was something else that brought him down a couple of months later. So I'm not sure that the idea that he was brought down by Sue Gray really holds much water.
No. Let's have a look at WhatsApp messages in the Telegraph, Candice. Yet another tranche.
Yeah, so this is a very interesting story on the front page of the Telegraph. It's about WhatsApp messages between Matt Hancock and Simon Case, the civil servant, coming into conflict with Rishi Sunak, the now Prime Minister, but then the Chancellor of the Exchequer, over lockdown restrictions. And what it shows is that there was real conflict between the Department of Health and Sunak's priorities. The Department of Health wanted to focus on tighter restrictions. Sunak wanted to keep businesses open. And what I find very interesting about the exchanges in between Simon Case and Matt Hancock is Matt Hancock would say, doesn't Sunak want to control the virus? Not really, I think, recognising that perhaps Sunak had other priorities. We've seen this with the exchanges that revealed the conflicts he had with Gavin Williamson, who was Education Secretary, wanted to keep schools open. Matt Hancock really wanted to get his way on things. So it shows how the Department of Health, had their priorities were very much prioritised over other departments, and Matt Hancock often got his way.
But you see, is it just me? I just sort of think with this, well, this is a statement of the obvious, isn't it? The Department of Health is going to focus on purely the health aspects of this. The Treasury is going to look at the financial implications. The Education Secretary is going to look at impact on schools, and then government, you've got to come to a compromise somehow, keep everyone a little bit happy. There's nothing in here which strikes me as anything apart from what you would expect.
No, you're right, it does. It makes perfect sense. I think most normal, ordinary members of the public, though, all they see, is the public-facing comments like they're one big happy family. So it's to see these disputes played out behind the scenes makes it look interesting. So it gives a window into what is going on that the public don't normally see. But you're right, if you look at it logically, Rishi Sunak's interests during the pandemic was to try and save the economy, whereas obviously Matt Hancock's interest was to save lives.
I'd be worried if Matt Hancock was worried about saving the economy and Rishi Sunak was worried about saving lives. And so then you'd have something to talk about.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, it's unusual to see this level of detail about how they converse with one another behind the scenes, and it's embarrassing for Matt Hancock, really, and those who he was sending messages to, who I'm sure are not best pleased that he decided to hand over all these messages to a journalist.
I dread to think what would happen if they got hold of any of ours. What do you reckon, Candice?
Oh, I would hate that. That would be awful. But that's where people are often the most frank.
Yeah,
so that's why it's quite interesting that we see this. We often see the motivations behind what they were doing.
And discussing COVID policies, what you're discussing in such a casual and colloquial way, and as you say, Kevin, not agreeing with each other. I mean, it really has been fascinating in the last few days, and there's going to be a lot more to come on these lockdown files. Kevin, let's go back to you, shall we? And this is in the Mail. Channel migrants are going to be banned from using human rights laws to stay in the UK. Tell us a bit more about this.
Yeah, so this is the eagerly anticipated illegal immigration bill, which has been in the pipeline for quite some time. The government's under an awful lot of pressure, particularly from Conservative MPs, to get to grips with the Channel boats. Obviously, Rishi Sunak has made it one of his 5 promises to stop the boats. There's a very high bar indeed. So Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, is going to be bringing forward this legislation next week, we're led to believe. And so they've given a flick to some of the papers into this morning, and the headline measure is that if you come across in one of the boats, you will be barred from using human rights laws to stay in this country. Which, looks fine on paper, but it's obviously going to meet with lots of resistance, not least legal resistance. And the question is whether or not this breaks international law, refugee conventions, that type of thing. And you can see it going the same way as the Rwanda scheme.
Does it matter if it breaks international refugee law? If it got approved by our Supreme Court?
Well, if it goes to the Supreme Court, perhaps not, but that's way down the line. Just because Parliament passes an act doesn't mean that it can override international law. As we've seen, the Rwanda thing isn't legislation, but it's just policy, and that's been gummed up by the courts, and no one has got on a plane to Rwanda.
So you sort of wonder,
far.
at what point do we start being able to actually make our own laws that we want?
I know. Well, this is why a lot of people have placed focus on the European Court of Human Rights. But Rishi Sunak just really it doesn't seem like he wants to leave that. It seems like he doesn't want to pick a fight. He wants to try and have good relations, and he's trying to find other ways to solve this issue by taking a more hardline approach like Australia does. If you arrive by boat, you can't settle here. So maybe that will be a disincentive.
So is that what Australia does?
Yeah, so they had their small boats policy, and it was if you arrive by a small boat, you will not be able to settle in Australia.
And does that still stand?
As far as I know, yes.
So that would mean then that Australia was breaking or not abiding by the international law on that.
It's possible. I mean, I don't know the legal nitty-gritty, but it's, ultimately it's what is sovereign, I guess.
Yeah, but also Australia.
But if there's a precedent set.
Yeah, although we will be signed up to the ECHR, the European courts, and it's whether or not. I spoke to one Conservative MP who said, this, if they don't stop the boats, then the next election is gone. This is going to be more than WhatsApp messages, more than Brexit. It is this issue which will decide whether or not the Conservatives even have a chance in the next election. And he said to me, and he was coming from the sort of Boris Johnson, Liz Truss wing of the party, saying that Rishi Sunak has to be prepared to pull the UK out of the European Court. Now, whether or not he wants to do that, I think Candice is right, instinctively he wouldn't want to do that.
Why not? In the sense that there's been talk, we'd set up our own human rights bill, wouldn't we, or whatever, in this country. So it's not as if everything's going to be scrapped, but it means we can at least legislate for what we want.
Well, yeah, but then you're then lumping yourself in with other nations like Belarus, who are have kind of withdrawn from the ECHR, and it's a difficult politically. And also at the same time, while it might appeal to the right wing of the Conservative Party, there's a lot of moderate Conservative MPs, your sort of One Nation group, who would not want that at all. So you're storing up trouble there. So it's not quite as straightforward as just saying, let's just pull out and everything will be fine. It's a very difficult political balancing act, and it might well be that it becomes a huge issue come the next general election campaign. The Conservatives might well go into it saying, vote Conservative and we'll pull out the ECHR. And then Labour puts Labour on the other side of the argument, and it could become a huge dividing issue at the next election.
It's so complex and interesting, isn't it? A lot going on.
It's a huge issue for voters. I mean, in all of the polling, you ask people what are the things that matter to them, and migrants and legal migrants coming to this country is always a top 3 issue.
Yeah, it's huge.
But it's not something that's easy to tackle, because if it was, it would have been done by now.
I can understand the frustration, though. You're frustrated, thinking, well, why can't we just get on with it? It's a valid question, though. Now, shall we look at the coronation? Who knew that the sacred oil, is traditionally made of unguents, whatever they are, no idea, spices and pungent animal parts. I suppose unguents are just smelly things,
I think so, yeah.
But the king isn't going to have that. He doesn't want to be anointed with smelly animal parts.
Yes.
You can blame him.
Yeah. So this is the story in the Mail. It's actually quite an interesting story. So Prince Charles is sort of breaking with tradition, and his sacred oil that he's going to be anointed with is actually made of olives.
Oh, well, that makes sense.
Yes, and they come from Jerusalem, where his grandmother is buried. She's buried on the Mount of Olives, this very famous graveyard. And so they've taken olives from there. They've also taken apparently jasmine, orange blossom, and it was paraded through the streets of Jerusalem, this oil, outside one of the most ancient Christian churches in the world. And he's not going to be having any animal products in it, which is interesting. I wonder if that's to do with his environmental beliefs, why he's chosen to go with...
It's probably just because it sounds disgusting, frankly.
Yes, well, yeah, because the traditional elements for this anointing oil is ambergris, which is stuff that whales vomit up, and that you find floating on the top of the ocean.
It used to be perfume out of it.
It used to be a delicacy. It used to be a huge delicacy, but now people kind of go, "Ooh, that's disgusting." There's things from civet cats. I mean, a lot of stuff that nowadays people find a little bit cruel.
Civet cat.
Yeah, it's a cat. It's something that they take from, I think, one of their glands. Exactly. People have that reaction. Yeah. Well, it's from the article. Yeah, it was pretty comprehensive, actually.
I mean, that's just disgusting. disgusting. Who can blame him, frankly? Olive oil sounds much better.
I think I'd opt for the olive oil as well, wouldn't you?
Plus you can dip your bread in it afterwards. Yeah. Oh, good on him.
Sticking with bread, shall we?
Oh, here we go.
Very
Food.
good.
Oh, it's a good
Excellent.
segue.
Food.
On to Gale's the Bakery. Could be setting up drive-throus, Kevin.
Yeah, this is quite incredible, actually. I mean, you think of drive-thrus, you normally think of burgers or fried chicken or whatever, but now apparently Gale's, quite an upmarket bakery chain, are moving into drive-through. So you can get like a drive-through. I'm not sure a drive-through croissant is quite as appealing as a drive-through burger. Certainly not at maybe 2 o'clock in the morning.
Is Gale's just a southern thing?
I think it must be,
I think it's quite a London thing, isn't it?
Right.
And it's expensive as well. I mean, I don't know how that's going to work on a drive-through. How much appetite? But
I guess it'll be a little very good, yeah. It might be a little bit.
It's quite expensive.
Well, a little bit cheaper because you're not eating in, I guess, so it's not quite as expensive. But at the same time, as I say, you just think of being in your car and all the crumbs from the bakery stuff's all over.
I hadn't thought of the crumbs.
Flaky pastry.
It's just you want to be satisfied after grabbing a drive-through, don't you? You want to think, oh, that was good.
Yes, I don't know. For me, it doesn't quite fit. You know, drive-thrus it's stuff that's very quick convenience. Gale's is something you sit down, you have a nice experience. But having said that, during the lockdown, I think that a lot of businesses realise that people's behaviour will adjust, and they learn that people are totally fine with going to drive-thrus and getting takeaway croissants, which is not something that you would usually think would work, but apparently it has.
And it's also looking to move away from the high street as well, you know, so if they're going to have drive-thrus, there'll be less need, for them to have a high street.
Yeah, maybe.
There are coffee chains now, aren't there, that do drive-thrus?
Oh, Starbucks do drive-thrus.
Costa drive-thrus.
Costa, yeah.
But it seems very American, doesn't it, to turn up and ask for a coffee and get it through the window?
That.
Yes, it's interesting because they were saying in the article how this is very much an American thing, drive-through diners, and now there are some American drive-through companies that are moving into the UK market. So maybe that's also why UK companies need to adjust to this increased competition.
And Canadian, because Tim Hortons have opened. There's a couple of Tim Hortons. I don't know. Did they sell like donuts or something?
Yeah.
It's a Canadian place.
Yes,
isn't it?
yeah, coffee and donuts.
But that's
very American.
They've got 2 drive-thrus near me.
Really?
Yeah.
Have we been?
No. No.
I've never even heard of it.
No, well, I hadn't until they popped up, but it seems to be a thing.
I guess there must be people must want it.
We've also got a drive-through Taco Bell.
That's very American.
Yes,
Yeah.
very. You're very well set up there.
Oh, darling,
You don't need to leave the car.
we do things very well in the South Midlands. What can I tell you? But no, it's not really my cup of tea. An egg McMuffin maybe, but that's about as far as I go. Let's talk Strictly, Candice, because Sophie Morgan. I used to have Sophie Morgan on my show years ago. She's a very nice person. But anyway, she might be the first wheelchair contestant on Strictly.
Yeah, this is front page of The Sun, and it's a story about Sophie Morgan, who's famously paralysed from the waist down, and she's in a wheelchair from a car accident when she was about 18. And she may be Strictly's first contestant in a wheelchair. And I actually think this is great. This is really, really good. You know, the Invictus Games have showed that just because people have disabilities doesn't mean that they're not capable of incredible physical prowess. And it's very inclusive, and I know people can sometimes be a bit cynical about things like that. I think when it comes to disability like this, it's very important to make sure people like that are visible and participating in life.
Yeah, I think it's hard to argue against it, to be honest. We've got to leave it there. Kevin, Candice, thank you both very much indeed. We'll see you a little bit later on.